Good morning. I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the new 48 CFR Code of Federal Regulation that was released on September 10th earlier this year. It's been in the news quite a bit. People were pretty excited about it, and there's been a lot of discussion. So I just want to take a few minutes to help expand on it a little bit so that we understand why all of the excitement and what it really means to the CMMC, or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification program overall. But first, my name is Tom Conkle. I'm a cybersecurity engineer with Optic Cyber Solutions and also a lead CCA within the CMMC ecosystem. I've been fortunate enough to have an opportunity to work with several organizations to help them prepare for their CMMC certification and help them pass. I've also been fortunate enough to work with C3PAOs, or CMMC third-party assessment organizations, as an assessor to actually perform formal assessments. So I understand what the assessors are looking for from a CMMC standpoint. Before we jump into 48 CFR, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about a little bit about the history and what the program has been that has led us to where we are and the different components of it so that we understand the CMMC program as a whole. And I wanted to start back in 2017. This is when the DFARS 252-204-7012 was first introduced. And this is the regulation that required or introduced NIST Special Publication 800-171, or the security controls necessary to protect CUI, or controlled unclassified information. So back in 2017 is when DoD recognized a problem with the loss of sensitive CUI information and wanted to ensure that the DIB was properly protecting the information and gave them the security controls, and requested that they attest that they're implementing those security controls if they accept the award of a contract that has CUI. And then shortly thereafter, in 2019, when the CMMC program first started to being discussed, it was realized that the self-attestation wasn't working and that something additional was going to need to be done. And that's when we started talking about CMMC, that 5 years later, now in 2024, 32 CFR was effective, establishing the CMMC program itself. So this is the regulation that defines the CMMC program. The fact that it has the 3 levels defines the ecosystem and the different players and their responsibilities, including the Cyber AB, what their role is in overseeing the assessment process itself. So 32 CFR is all about defining the boundaries, or what is the CMMC program itself. 48 CFR that was just released and is going to be effective in November is the one that actually authorizes contracting officers to put it in contracts. And that's where we want to do a deeper dive today, so that we really understand what is 48 CFR doing and why has there been so much discussion about it. And we also want to briefly talk about the phased rollout approach for CMMC and what that means to you. If you're a DoD contractor working with CUI or FCI information, what is your expectations? So, as I mentioned, 48 CFR was published on September 10th, and this is the regulation that modifies the procurement processes to incorporate CMMC, specifically updating parts 204, 212, 217, and 252 of the 48 CFR itself. This is what's going to require contracting officers to put CMMC into contracts. So it's an important distinction. It's not a regulation that allows them to put it in contracts. It actually requires contracting officers, if their contracts include the processing of FCI or CUI, they have to put it in a contract unless they get a waiver from the DoD CIO office, which the DoD CIO has already said those will be very limited from it. From a DoD standpoint, the modification to 48 CFR is actually kind of small at only 18 pages. And of those 18 pages, the first 15 address public comments that were received on the rule itself. So we've got a lot of insight into what the DoD was thinking and the reason that they put this rule in place, and how it's going to be enforced, becoming effective on November 10th, 2025. So So as I mentioned, 48 CFR is a relatively short document. Lots of good information on the comments was received from over 97 different respondents. There are 45 responses that they did address in there, so you can get some insight again for what they were considering. But most importantly, what the 48 CFR does is it implements the DFARS 252.204.7021 clause and creates a new clause at 252.204.7025. Okay, so let's take a moment to talk about the two new DFARS clauses. The first one being 7021. This is the contractor compliance with the CMMC program itself. And this is where we really see a lot of detail on what the DoD is going to expect of contractors that accept the award of contracts with FCI or CUI. The first thing that we see in there is it does reinforce the annual affirmation that you're going to continually comply with your CMMC program, that your system's still remaining securely, and you will be required to log into the supplier performance risk system and update that affirmation saying that nothing has changed. For organizations that are at level 2 or level 3 of CMMC and require certification, it does require that certification get renewed every 3 years. So we're going to have that third party come in to take a look at the systems and confirm that we're still meeting all of the security controls appropriately. It also requires us to flow down this clause to all subcontracts and suppliers that process, store, or transmit FCI or CUI information. An interesting point to note about 48 CFR is when they talk about subcontractors and suppliers, they do mention contractual instruments. So they don't say that you actually have to have a contract with them, but any kind of instrument, whether it's an agreement, partnership, task order, work order, right? 7021 still has to be flowed down to them to ensure that FCI and CUI is protected as the subcontractors work with that information as well. It also requires that you contact the contracting officer if anything changes in your environment that would invalidate the certification, or you're no longer meeting some of the requirements in CMMC. So not only do we have to do the annual affirmation, but if anything significantly changes in the environment, we've got to let the contracting officer know about that change. It also requires organizations to identify their CMMC unique identifier when bidding on work and accepting a contract award. So basically what this means is when you go into the SPRS system to do your affirmation, or when the certifier goes in to upload their results of your certification, a CMMC UID is created. This will be a 10-digit alphanumeric number identifier that you'll simply put in your contracts whenever you're bidding on work. And upon award, prior to making an award, a contracting officer will simply look at that unique identifier and understand what systems are going to be used in the support of the contract that you're bidding on. And then they'll go in, look at the CMMC system and see how the system was scoped for your assessment, and just make sure that the two align. And this will ensure that organizations don't have one system assessed and then use a different system in delivery of their contract. If the two scopes don't align, the contracting officer simply isn't authorized to make the award, and we'll just move on to the next one in line. And also 7021, less important thing to note about that is it does exclude COTS, or commercial products. If you making a coffee maker off the shelf, right, and that off the shelf system is what you're providing to the DoD, CMMC is not applicable for it. However, if you're modifying that COTS service, system, appliance, whatever it is, in any way based on specific DoD needs, it's no longer COTS, and it does come back into play. And if there's FCI and CUI, you're expected to meet the CMMC requirements. As I previously mentioned, 48 CFR update also added DFARS 252-204-7025, or the Notice of Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Level Requirements. Basically, 7025 and 7021 clauses are interlaced now. So 7021 requires that we implement CMMC, that we have our information in SPRS, and that we've gotten the third-party certification when required, and we know when it's required by 7025. So in clause 7025, it tells contracting officers that they are required to let contractors know what level of CMMC is applicable for the contract vehicle that they're about to award. There are 4 possible choices. The CMMC level 1, if you just have FCI information, that requires a self-assessment. If you have CUI information, you can be CMMC level 2 and just have to do a self-assessment. You may also be a CMMC level 2 with a CMMC third-party assessment organization, which would require that third-party assessor to come in and look at you. Or if you have critical CUI or a lot of aggregated CUI, then you may be the contract may be CMMC level 3 and require a DIBCAC assessment of itself. So the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center will come in and assess the additional 24 security controls between level 2 and level 1 to make sure that you're allowed to have that sensitive information. So while 7025 is where the contracting officer will tell you what level of CMC is necessary, the clause itself does not define when each level will be used. And I personally believe this is just to simply give the DoD a little bit of flexibility. If they want to change their guidance, they won't have to go back through the rule. However, there was a memorandum released in January of 2025 titled Implementing the CMMC Program, Guidance for Determining Appropriate CMMC Compliance Assessment Levels and Process for Waiving CMMC Assessment Requirements. And it's in that memo that has specific guidelines to contracting officers to help them understand when each level is appropriate based on the type of information being processed on their contract. Okay, and again, 25 just reinforces that a contracting officer cannot make an award of a contract unless there is a valid current CMMC status in the SPRS system, right? And we have to make sure that it also requires that the contractor maintains their CMMC UID for the system that is going to be using in the contract. It also identifies that you can have more than one UID. So if you had 3 different systems assessed, you have 3 different UIDs, but the culmination of those 3 systems will be work together in delivery of a contract. That's perfectly fine. You just put the 3 UIDs on the proposal. The contracting officer will verify the scope of all 3 of them against the work that's being done on the contract, and then be able to make award. Okay, so that was a little bit of information on 48 CFR and the 2 DFARS clauses that it implements to make the CMMC program effective beginning in November 10th of this year. But I want to take a moment now to also talk about some of the effects that the DoD expects the CMMC program to have on different organizations within the DIB. Most notably, the DoD has estimated that over 330,000 different contractors will be affected by CMMC. They know that. They expect 62% of those to be only assessed at level 1 and require a self-assessment because they will only have FCI information, that federal contract information, in processing their contract with the DoD. But they also estimate that 35% of the DIB will need to be certified at level 2. So basically having that C3PAO, or the CMMC third-party assessment organization, come in and do that third-party validation of your cybersecurity capabilities. They did point out that they do think that 2% of the DIB can expect to be only have to do a self-assessment at level 2, but you can see that's a dramatically lower number. And again, it's back to that memo that I talked about previously that was released in January. Then it simply says that if you have defense information or CUI from the defense category, that you're required to have a third-party assessment. And being the DoD, it's just anticipated that a lot of DoD contracts will have CUI from the Defense Organizational Index Group within the CUI registry. I also wanted to point out that the DoD in their comments on 48 CFR, they do recognize that 68% of the DIB is small businesses, and they do understand that this is going to have an impact to small businesses and how they're going to be able to operate. In the comments, they called out that they had tried alternatives, the self-attestation, for example, back in 2017, and they tried to identify other ways to help lessen the burden. But the risk of continuing to lose all of the CUI and the intellectual property from the US to our adversaries was just too great, and they could not come up with another alternative other than CMMC in implementing the SP 800-171 Rev 2 security controls. So just want to take a moment to say, yep, DoD did call that out. They do understand, that it's going to be about, 230 different small businesses will be affected, which is pretty much the backbone of the DIB itself. So now that we see if we have CUI, we're more than likely going to have a third-party certification. What does that really mean? What do we have to do? And ultimately, what it is, it's about convincing a third party that you are properly meeting the security controls and you've security program is operating as you've defined it, right? So the first key thing there is, back in when we were doing self-attestation, we had to prove it to ourselves. We had to know what we were doing. Didn't necessarily require as much evidence and process and procedures to show how things were being repeatedly done. But now if we have the third party coming in, we need to have more defined, mature capabilities in place so that the assessor can verify that not only do you have a policy for meeting the controls, but the process is in place, it's repeatable, it is being followed, and we have the evidence, whether it's logs, tickets, files, etc., to prove that we are actually reviewing information when we're supposed to. We're tracking changes in the system, for example. So it really is about getting to that certification process and moving beyond just technical controls and capabilities, but being able to demonstrate to that third party that we've implemented things appropriately and we're able to continually operate our systems securely. As I mentioned when we started, the CMMC program does identify a 4-phased rollout process, and with the publication of 48 CFR and the identification of the effective date being November 10th, 2025, we now know exactly when phase 1 begins. So on November 10th, 2025, we will begin phase 1 of the program, and this is where we require self-assessments for level 1 and level 2. So your organization will need to go through and evaluate your capabilities on how well you have addressed the CMMC requirements, and then upload your affirmation to SPRS that you have met the requirements. When we get to November of 2026, we'll enter into phase 2. Phase 2 is when we'll start seeing procurements requiring level 2 certifications, whether this from the DIBCAC or the CMMC third-party assessment organization, really taking off. During phase 1, the DoD does have the right to request third-party assessment, but in phase 2 in November of 26, right, that will no longer be optional, right? Contracting officers will have to have that third-party certification to make award of a contract. And keeping in mind that flow down requirement, so that means they can't issue a contract to a prime if any of the subcontractors don't have their certification but need to process CUI. Okay. In November of 27, this is when we'll start seeing more of the level 3 certifications rolling out. This is for that critical CUI, or we have large aggregations of CUI, and the DIBCAC will come out and do those assessments for you to evaluate the additional 24 security controls from NIST SP 800-172. And then by November of 28, the full program will be live, right? And this is where we will continue to do the annual affirmations and the triannual certifications as required for the contract to make sure that we can keep the contract moving and keep processing and doing the good work for the DoD itself. I did want to mention that, when we're talking about contract awards, the rule itself does specify that that's pretty much any type of contract, whether it's a task order, a work order, a new contract. It does require that if you're exercising an option in a contract, right? CMMC has to be implemented. So if you were awarded a 5-year contract or a 1-year contract with 4 option years in 2024, and you're coming up on your new option year now, you could expect that if after November 10th that option is being exercised, you'll see the CMMC requirement in there, and you'll be in phase 1 at that point. It won't be at the end of that contract. A period of performance extension or exercising an option does take it back through the procurement process and kicks in 48 CFR, so that we have to meet the CMMC requirements. Again, my name is Tom Conkle. Just wanted to provide a little bit more clarity and understanding of what 48 CFR is and why everyone's talking about it, right? Because now it's what's authorizing the procurements to require the CMMC program that was put in place back in 2024. I've included some links here on the screen to the CFR so that you can review it yourself. I've also provided some links to the for the CMMC program from the DoD CIO office, as well as some free resources from Optic to help you get started on your CMMC journey, being able to track your progress and help document and see where your cybersecurity program is. And we've just, in helping organizations through the CMMC process, we have found that the tracker and the template are great places to get started. I wanted to make that something that to help you as well. Okay, so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Optic Cyber Solutions strives to help organizations identify and address their blind spots through our assessment, implementation, and advising services. For more information about Optic Cyber Solutions and our services, reach out at info@opticcyber.com or check out our website at opticcyber.com.